Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our second webinar series in our series titled Assessing Opportunities and Barriers for Minority Producers Transitioning to Climate Smart and Regenerative Agricultural Programs. What you'll note is that there's a poll as soon as you have entered the chat into the Zoom because we want to get a sense of who's in the room. And we are set up to have a really exciting panel discussion. But while folks are trickling in, we're just asking that you complete that Zoom poll so that we can have some information about who's in the room and so that we can have a sense of different regions represented and different perspectives. I'll start in one moment and we'll provide an overview of what we'll do today together. All right, it looks like folks are still trickling in, which is awesome. Okay, we'll give it one more minute and then we'll dive right in. And for those folks that may be concerned about it, we will have a recording of this posted on our website, and everyone that registered will also get a link to the recording. So if there's anything you missed or you have to leave early or you didn't quite get something that the panel said, there will be a recording that will be shared following. All right, I think we can get started and transition to our agenda. So thank you again so much for joining us. This is our second webinar. We'll spend a few minutes kind of setting the stage for why we're here and what we're interested in, and then we'll transition to a really amazing moderated panel discussion that will cover the current state of science as it relates to soil health adoption of practices and economics, and then we'll explore some opportunities and barriers for increased adoption. For those less familiar with me, I am Dr. Lakeisha Odom from the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research. I'll describe a little bit more about my organization shortly. And then we have two other amazing colleagues that have helped co-design and lead these efforts. Suzanne Russo from Resources for the Future, who is not able to be with us today, but we will be able to share a bit more about her organization. And then Seneca Edwards Heron from Freedmen Heirs Foundation, who will provide an overview of her organization and how we kind of got together and thought that this was a compelling and exciting topic to explore. After we have the panel, we will then have Q&A opportunity for attendees. So as we progress to the next slide, we'll talk about housekeeping and objectives of the meeting. So first, why did we decide to work on this webinar series, a foundation to nonprofits? We recognize that minority producers are critical components to our nation's food security, land management, and environmental stewardship pathways. We also recognize that our minority producers are almost exclusively our food producers, and though they produce crops and livestock to feed regional communities, rather than growing commodity crops. We recognize that often our minority producers tend to be smaller producers, and we recognize that because of systemic challenges, they have more limited resources than their counterparts. But they use their ingenuity and deep understanding of their land to remain productive in these spaces. But we recognize that there are some barriers that leave our producers of color underinvested in and across the spectrum of public agricultural programs. We also recognize that there is growing interest from non-federal partners in providing resources, research, information, and support to our minority producers. So we hope that with this series of panel discussions, we can have a greater understanding of barriers in these spaces. And this panel is targeted today in discussing current states of soil health practices, economics, and adoption, and then thinking about the latest scientific insights and practical solutions, specifically in the field of soil health and regenerative management. Next slide. A little bit of housekeeping. During the first part of the dialogue, you'll recognize that you're muted. So please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat or the QA throughout the presentation. There will be time at the end of the presentation for questions. The panel will also have a series of questions, but then you can ask questions of the panelists and moderator if time allows. As I mentioned earlier, we will record and share this webinar with registrants via email, and the recording will also be available on our website for your reference. I think we're almost to the point where if those folks haven't responded to their poll, I think we're going to close it if it hadn't already closed. So we'll be excited to see the results of that. I'll share a little bit about FAR, and then I will share something about our research, our partner RFF, and then I'll transition to Seneca. So, for those less familiar with FAR, we are an independent 501c3 created in the 2014 Farm Bill. The purpose of our organization is to increase public agriculture research investments, fill knowledge gaps, and complement the USDA's research agenda. To date, since our inception, we've funded over 360 grants, and we've matched and awarded approximately $750 million with 550 distinct partners. We work across a number of priority areas, cultivating thriving production systems, which houses work around crops and animals, bolstering healthy food systems, which covers urban food work as well as health ag nexus, food waste, food loss, controlled environments, sustaining vibrant agro ecosystems, which is the priority area in which I sit, where we look at improvements to soil, water, and climate. And then our fourth pillar is strengthening workforce. So we think about ways in which we can encourage the next generation of scientific leaders in ag workforce. We recognize that the reason that we do the work we do is that for every dollar spent in public agriculture research investment, it generates $20 in US economic benefit. So we recognize that there's a lot of opportunity to engage in research investment, and we want to ensure that our minority or underserved producers are central to the work that we do. Next slide. As our colleague Suzanne Russo is not available, I'm happy to overview RFF's mission, vision, and values. So the mission of RFF is to improve environmental, energy, and natural resource decisions through impartial economic research and policy engagement. And their vision is a future where climate change no longer threatens well-being and where smart environmental decisions help to uplift communities around the world. They focus on core values of balance, rigor, independence, respect, and results. So you can see the alignment between FAR and RFF and Freedmen Heirs. So now I'll transition to my colleague Seneca Heron Edwards to overview and introduce our panel. Seneca.
Thank you, Dr. Odom, and good afternoon to everyone that is joining us today. We do appreciate you taking time out of your day to be with us and to learn more about this webinar topic. And it's going to be a very exciting panel. I am the founder and executive director of Freedmen Heirs Foundation. We are a nonprofit organization with a laser focus on expediting change in U.S. agriculture by bridging the gap between two worlds, Black farmers and the marketplace. We also are dedicated to a vision of eliminating inequities in agriculture. Freedmen Heirs Foundation's mission is to provide Black farmers with access to technical assistance, access to capital, and access to new market opportunities. Well, how do we do that? Everything we do at Freedmen Heirs Foundation is centered around trust. And we know that there is a definition of trust, but the acronym that we use is transparency, respect, understanding, support, and transformation. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I not visible? We are dedicated to making sure that producers have access to markets, to capital, and markets, access to capital and technical assistance. And we want to make sure that those producers have a voice at the table. And we want to continue to do the work that will strengthen these communities as well as bring them to the forefront of what's taking place in U.S. agriculture. Next slide, please. Another fun factoid for us today is that we will have an interactive panel. And what that means is that you can point your camera on your phone towards the screen, and you will be able to answer questions real time while we're in the midst of the presentation today. I'll give everybody the opportunity to do that. The first question for the webinar today is, what is your primary role in agriculture? Okay, researcher, agribusiness professional, advocate. Okay, lots of researchers. Okay, wonderful. It appears that we have a very diverse group. great. Policymakers. It's also nice to know. Wonderful. This is great. So throughout the webinar today, we will continue to have these interactive polling questions for you just so that we can get a feel for who's in the room, but also to get information real time and so that we can utilize that information and process it and synthesize it so that we can make sure that we're accommodating everyone in the room, but that we're also understanding what the needs concerning the different questions are. Next slide, please. So at the top of the call, Dr. Odom, there was a poll and we had ideas on where folks were located. And so this gives us an idea. I cannot see the map fully on my screen, but I do see the shadings. So it looks like we have folks from different parts of the country, Virginia, North Carolina, Texas, Pennsylvania. So we have a great mixture regionally. So I will now introduce the moderator for this panel today. And I have worked with her before, and she's absolutely an expert in the field of soil science. So Dr. Diana Bagnall is a research soil scientist and program director leading the U.S. Regenerative Cotton Fund and other projects at the Soil Health Institute. She is an applied soil physicist specializing in soil, physical health, and socioeconomic dynamics of soil management. Without further ado, I will transition the webinar session to you, Dr. Bagnall.
Thank you so much, Seneca. It's great to be here today. Always good to see you and to work with you. We have a really excellent lineup that I'm excited to get to share with everyone. So what we're going to do is we'll start out with Dr. McGill giving us some information about the state of the science and really giving us a deep dive into the biophysics to lay the groundwork for our session today. We'll then move to Dr. Cynthia Daly, and she's going to tell us about her leadership and work in creating both equitable and resilient agricultural systems. Then we'll move to Ruth Canada and get some real world application of what's needed if we're going to succeed with prosperous and equitable agricultural systems, especially thinking about our minority growers. And then I'll share just a few slides about some perspectives on barriers and opportunities for soil health adoption for minority growers, and we'll transition at that point into the panel. So our first speaker, as I said, is Dr. Bonnie McGill, and we'll go ahead and start getting Bonnie's slides set up. And I'm going to give her her introduction now. Bonnie is a senior climate and soil health scientist at American Farmland Trust. She has a PhD in ecosystem ecology from Michigan State University. Her research focuses on accounting for greenhouse gas emissions and soil carbon storage due to changes in agricultural practices and land use. And her work integrates biophysical science with social science approaches, something I'm really passionate about, can't wait to hear more about. And she has expertise in science communication and knowledge co-development. Bonnie is an Appalachian and lives in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So Bonnie, take it away.
There we go. Find the unmute button. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Lakeisha, Seneca, and Suzanne for having me on your panel today. And so the title for my talk is Why Climate Smart Agriculture and How Can I Get Some? And so I wanted to just first, in case you're not familiar with American Farmland Trust, maybe you've seen our bumper stickers around, the No Farms, No Food. That's us. And our mission at AFT is saving the land that sustains us by protecting farmland, promoting environmentally sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land. At the end of my presentation, I'll share 3 resources from AFT to help different types of stakeholders get some climate smart agriculture. So let's jump into why climate smart agriculture. Just going to state some of the obvious here. The climate is changing due to human activities. I'm going to take it as a given for this audience. I don't need to explain that. And we know that farmers and ranchers are working on the front lines of climate change every day. I want to point out a few things about this statement. First is it's kind of good news that climate change is human caused because that means it can be human solved. The second thing I want to point out here is that farmers are not responsible for the whole problem, and they're not responsible for solving the whole problem. There's a lot of excitement in getting climate mitigation activities happening in agriculture and forestry right now. And that's in part because these are really special sectors that can implement climate solutions at scale today, whereas other sectors are making progress but face some technological and market barriers to really scaling up. But it's important when we're talking with farmers about climate smart agriculture to not make them feel like they're carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders for solving this. So what is climate smart agriculture? I think kind of understanding the what also helps us get at the why. There are three main goals to climate smart agriculture, and this is a review. If you attended the first webinar, Ms. Seneca Edwards-Heron went into this, but good to repeat. So the first of the three goals is increased productivity or sustainably intensifying agriculture. It might not seem obvious what the climate connection is to that, so let me explain. If we need to grow more food to feed a growing population and increasing consumption levels per capita, we can do that by using more land or by growing more food on the same acres where we're already doing agriculture. Using more land has important impacts on biodiversity as well as the climate. Usually converting forests, wetlands, and grasslands to agriculture involves substantial carbon emissions. The second goal is enhanced resilience. That's kind of obvious, helping farmers adapt to climate change so they can continue their livelihoods with these increasing weather extreme events. And then the third goal is reduced emissions or mitigating those greenhouse gas emissions. And this includes carbon sequestration practices as well. So I want to point out that when we talk with producers, it's really important to highlight this piece. The adapting to climate change is helping producers deal with the problems they're facing right now on their farm, whereas the mitigating greenhouse gas emissions is more of a benefit for the climate. And that's where we focus a lot of attention, and that's what I'm going to dig into here. But just wanted to also balance that out by mentioning the importance of the adaptation piece here. So let's talk for a few minutes about the role of U.S. agriculture in climate change. About 10% of U.S. human-caused greenhouse gas emissions are from agriculture, and that's emissions to the farm gate. If we look at the larger food system, including transportation, manufacturing, refrigeration, food waste, the food system is responsible for more like a third of human-caused greenhouse gas emissions. If we break up that 10% by agricultural activity, a little over half is from soil management, and that's mainly nitrous oxide or N2O emissions from croplands that are fertilized with synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. This blue pie piece is enteric fermentation, so that's the methane, and coming from livestock, and 95% of that is from beef and dairy cattle. The purple pie piece is manure management. That's nitrous oxide and methane emissions, and about 70% of that is coming from beef and dairy cattle. So if we look at these emissions by gas, about over 98% of those emissions are methane and nitrous oxide. So very little of it is actually carbon dioxide. But what we hear about is a lot about carbon. So you might be wondering how much of these emissions can start carbon sequestration kind of offset or mitigate. Studies produce kind of a range of somewhere around 8 to 52% of US agricultural greenhouse gas emissions can be offset with carbon sequestering practices alone. And if we add into that agroforestry, we can offset another 13%. And different studies show that it's feasible to reduce these emissions themselves by 16% by 2030. And then if we avoid the conversion of forests, grasslands, and wetlands to cropland, that'll give us another 9%, offset another 9% of those emissions to bring it to a total of about 33 to 77% of this pie chart, we can either reduce or mitigate with carbon sequestration. So there's not going to be a quiz on all these numbers, but what I want you to take away from this is that we, yes, need to focus on soil carbon sequestration, but also on reducing those emissions. So what's the mitigation potential of specific climate smart practices? This is a chart from a study by Joe Fargione and others looking at the climate mitigation potential in 2025. So like, what can we do now is maybe different from what we could do 15 or 20 years down the road, but what we can do now in millions of tons of CO2 equivalents per year. And these bars you see have different colors of green, and that's by the price point of a ton of carbon. So we can do more when we can pay, when the practice becomes more affordable at a higher price for carbon. So you can see that, and these are natural climate solutions, so it includes forests. You can see those are the big guys. And when we get into agriculture and grasslands, avoided grassland conversion is actually a big one. Cover crops are pretty big, but I want to point out that a study just recently came out saying this might be more like 19 million tons instead of 100. Biochar is a big one, but it's more on the expensive side. Alley cropping, cropland nutrient management, so bringing down those nitrous oxide emissions. You might notice that no-till is not on this list. And that's because a lot of uncertainty remains about the potential of no-till to build soil carbon. So there is a lack of consensus in the scientific community on that at this time, so it was not included in this study. And another thing you might notice are these big error bars. And that's because we have few long-term studies looking at the impact of these practices on soil carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. But in the last few years, there's been a much bigger push and more funding to tighten up these error bars. So let's talk about some of those areas of ongoing research. Wanting to understand better how we build soil carbon. Is the carbon being built in the topsoil? What's happening with the subsoil carbon? Which fraction of soil organic carbon is being built and protected? And what's the duration of carbon accrual rates? Soils cannot continuously absorb carbon for an infinite period of time, so how long is that? For reducing nitrous oxide emissions from cropland, really, we have a number of practices to help farmers reduce their nitrogen amount, use it more efficiently, but it comes down to sort of the behavioral and the economics of nitrogen use. And so we need to think about innovative things like yield risk insurance types of programs to help farmers manage that risk when they transition to improved nitrogen management. And then reducing methane emissions from cattle is a really big area where we have a lot of work to do. We understand at the national and the global level what emissions are from cattle, but when we try to narrow into a particular operation and understand what different breeds and different conditions and different diets, what their emissions are and how we can change those to reduce the emissions, we have a lot of places to go. And I imagine Cindy, our next speaker, has a lot more to say about that. Some of the research needs, maybe where less attention is being paid, is quantifying the adaptation value of practices. We've done a lot of emphasis on measuring the mitigation power. But when you're talking to a farmer about adopting a practice, being able to tell them, instead of anecdotally, but quantifying how improving the soil structure by using cover crops and no-till helps them get out on their fields sooner after a heavy rain in the springtime, or how planting summer annuals in their pasture helps provide forage for their livestock in these hotter summers. Those kinds of things we have more work to do. And also looking at the value of farms to their communities. So what I mean there is sort of, and this is, Lakeisha was sort of mentioned some of this in the beginning, is quantifying the economic, nutritional, and social value of small urban and rural farms, of minority-led farms to their communities, I suspect that these have a disproportionately large community impact compared to farms growing thousands of acres of commodity crops. But those large farms tend to be the ones getting prioritized that we have more data for, but they get prioritized for land protection, carbon market payments, and other resources. So how can we layer in data sets that kind of add an equity layer to how farms get prioritized for resources? So now I'm going to quickly finish up my talk by sharing 3 AFT resources with you all related to climate smart adoption. The first is a series of fact sheets put together by our team of social scientists summarizing the latest peer-reviewed literature. So one of those fact sheets is on peer networks. The second is on motivations and barriers to adoption. And the third is farmer participation in payment programs. And I'm going to share the links to these in the chat when I'm done talking. The second is our soil health economic case studies. We have these nice 2-page write-ups that profile individual farms and their journey for why they adopted soil health practices, and our economists do a cost-benefit analysis of the adoption of those practices. So you can see how the economics come out. We have 24 of these case studies so far for these states, and we're working on expanding that. And I'll share the link also to the toolkit so you can do your own case study and use our tool to do the calculations if you want. And then lastly, I want to mention our 2 partnerships for climate smart commodities that will soon be open up for producers to enroll. So one of them is on climate smart beef, where we'll be building grazing mentor networks, sort of like peer-to-peer networks to help producers adopt regenerative grazing practices. And so that one, we have a lot of great partners, including Seneca and the Freedmen Heirs Foundation. And the second partnership is AFT as a sub-award to Truterra's Climate Smart crops. So that's looking at commodity crops. And AFT's contribution is really focusing on getting financial assistance and technical assistance to historically underserved producers in that program. And that's all I have. Feel free to reach out through my email here, and I'm going to plug those resources into the chat. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Bonnie. That was excellent. I'm sure our audience has questions. I know I have a few that I can't wait to ask you when we do get to our panel discussion. At this point, I want to transition to our next speaker, Dr. Cynthia Daly. So I'll introduce her as she gets her slides set up. Dr. Daly is the director and co-founder of the Center for Regenerative Agriculture and Resilient Systems. She is the Rollins Endowed Professor for Environmental Literacy, the Organic Dairy Program Supervisor, and a professor in the College of Agriculture at California State University, Chico. And she's here to share some of her great wealth of knowledge with us. So Cindy, it's all yours. Take it away.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I'm hoping that my microphone is working. So I appreciate the invitation to participate in this panel. I think this is a really important topic. Talking about transition into this regenerative climate smart type paradigm. And I think, really addressing barriers to transition, in all sectors, but particularly for those who have found it difficult for a variety of reasons that we're going to talk about today. So the center itself was really founded in 2016, and we became an official center in 2019 on campus. And where our goal is to support regenerative ag as a nature-based solution to climate. We want to make regenerative agriculture the new standard. So it's no longer, conventional, regenerative. It's the way in which we produce food and fiber in this country and around the globe. We had spent a lot of time defining regenerative agriculture. It does seem to be a topic, of a very popular topic. We have a lot of collaborators, and we have a leadership council and a group of growers that are very instrumental in directing our entire program. And collectively, we came up with this particular definition. Now, it's not necessarily, what everyone will be using. And we did spend the last, 3 or 4 months with the California Department of Food and Agriculture on their Regenerative Ag Working Group to define it for CDFA. And that is now complete, with the exception it will go out for public comment, and then it'll be reviewed again before it is actually published and become official. But, that definition should drive policy in the state of California going forward. So we're excited that CDFA, dove into that. It was a bit of a quagmire, and there were a lot of individuals with a lot of opinions in terms of, what is regenerative or what should it be. So ultimately, our program dedicated to the transition and dedicated to the science of regenerative management We've built our program into about 4 different categories, 4 different program areas. And, the one that's, been around the longest and probably the most well-funded is the applied research work that we're doing. And we are in multiple locations around the state of California and into Arizona and New Mexico, where we are involved in really studying the effects of these regenerative farming practices on soil health, rebuilding soil health, regenerating the soils. What is the impact of these practices on soil carbon accumulation? And we also have a big focus on farmer transition. And that includes a lot of incentives that go out to all kinds of growers, and a technical assistance training certificate program that is very, very unique in that we're basically training professionals in the industry about regenerative paradigms, about regenerative agriculture, so that they can build that into their conservation planning exercises for all growers. And then ultimately, the educational aspects, we're really worried, about the future of agriculture. So integrating regenerative ag and, this idea of soil health and the importance of regeneration into all ag curriculum needs to be the standard across the country and around the globe. And so we're starting with a minor and an option. And we have also created an integrated a master's degree in regenerative agriculture. And so ultimately, all of these programs go towards, supporting policy and supporting the transition to regenerative agriculture. So barriers, I think, the beauty of this webinar series is that it's really dedicated to, these barriers to transition for minority farmers. And there are many barriers, financial constraints, access issues, just lack of technical expertise, but also technical expertise that's actually culturally relevant, to these different entities. There's a tremendous communication divide. And some of that is technological, but others is cultural that, we do need to address. And I think there's several on this panel that are making inroads there. Of course, the land ownership and tenure tends to be a real issue for minorities in particular, and young people. Young people in our program, don't necessarily come from traditional agriculture. These tend to be folks that want to come into agriculture because they see the opportunity in regenerative ag. They don't necessarily have a background in ag, but they want to be involved in ag. Those individuals don't have access to ground either. And so land access is also an issue, for, our young farmers and ranchers of all type, but particularly with respect to, to minorities. They have other barriers, including historical disadvantages, from institutional biases, market access, economic pressures. They tend to be the smaller growers, very difficult to compete in this economic situation, in this commodity market that we have, especially in the States. So it's a serious economic barrier to many growers, minority included. And then, of course, the lack of community, because they tend to be fewer in number, and strength in number is a real thing. And trying to bring together minority growers so that they have enough support in technical assistance and also in mentorship is important. So our programs where we have specifically worked, to enhance our outreach and our support of minority growers, in particular, our technical assistance provider training program. It's a workforce development certificate program, and what we're doing is supporting and developing or actually providing technical expertise where there is a gap. We don't have a lot of technical expertise out on farms supporting growers with the planning, design, and implementation of climate-smart or regenerative ag practices. So our program is really designed around that. We have a variety of short courses that are right at this point in time non-credit, but all of these courses have been designed to go into the for credit category and become officially offered through our catalog, so that our students in agriculture can be taking these classes for credit within their agricultural degrees. So to address the barriers that we're seeing in this technical assistance, training and educational area, we are hiring translators in Spanish and Hmong in particular, because those tend to be, the minority growers that are in our particular region, Northern California. And we cover most of California with respect to our programming. So that has been helpful. Specific to the TAP program itself, we have got a technical assistance provider team. They do a lot of work on farms and ranches and with minorities. So having translators on staff is really an important aspect of making sure that we are bridging that communication barrier and that communication divide. We also translate, our courses. Spanish is the one that we're working on currently. And, if there, does appear to be a need, we would love to be able to do that in Hmong as well. But the other way in which we're addressing that is seeking out those in those communities that want to become certified as TAPs. And then, because they are bilingual, they would be the perfect candidates to provide support to their communities in climate smart or regenerative agriculture. And we do have our webinars that are translated as well. We're also investigating the need and the possibility of doing more translational work in Hindi. We have we have a lot of Indian farmers in this particular region, and they too need translational support. And so trying to identify bilingual Hindi speakers that could become certified and then provide that kind of training in their individual communities would be ideal. And if, funding was not a problem or not a question, we would hire translators specific to those communities, train them with our training program, and then specifically have them working directly with their communities in a kind of train the trainer type of a program. I think that's very effective. We have seen huge upswings in the number of Hispanic students that are enrolling in our College of Agriculture, because we have recruited and supported a number of Hispanic ag ambassadors that have gone into, primarily FFA programs that are dominated, with the Hispanic community, and recruiting those students with Spanish-speaking students has been phenomenal. And it has definitely increased our numbers with enrollment. We are just under 50% in the College of Agriculture that are Hispanic, and the Chico State is a Hispanic serving institution. So we do spend a lot of time in this arena. This is a very important topic for us. Other things that we do, as part of our farmer transition, we have several programs like this Regional Conservation Partnership Program in soil health that provides incentives to growers. This is federal money that we brought to our region in the North State and are making available to those growers for implementation. Now, those growers do have to have technical assistance in order to develop the plan and the application to get the funding. So therein again, is our translators and our experts with bilingual capabilities to help us do that. And a minimum of 25% of these funds, are dedicated to the underrepresented and minority type farmers. So those are direct incentives that are going to these growers. We're about $2.5 million into our program at this stage. We've got about 2.5 years to go there. We also have a Climate Smart Commodity grant that is also dedicated to a bulk of that money going into minority farmers and ranchers, so that not only does it it's not a huge incentive, but it's enough to get them started, and they can use these incentives for marketing strategies if they choose to. But we also have the technical expertise that we're providing through the center to get them into that transitional mode. and then the collective collaborative marketing strategies. So we are setting up vendors that are interested in purchasing product from these growers. So our food hub is designed to aggregate product from growers and then make it available to vendors and contracts that would not have been accessible before. We're talking about hospitals, institutions, AS dining, campus, food service, those kinds of programs that have a big need and would love to do local, but have no way to make that happen in their own institutions. That's what this food hub is about. And that is primarily dedicated to minority growers. And we have specific individuals that are dedicated to the recruitment of minority growers to help them in all aspects of that particular project. We have a climate action grant really through the Office of the President at the University of California to do multiple things. But again, it's to help train TAPs in climate smart agriculture, and then to develop our applied research program, which again, we have 15 students employed as a part and a partner to this project, which goes throughout the state of California. So right now we've got 5 locations where we have side-by-side regenerative and our standard practice in the same ecosystem on the same farm, growing the same stuff, but only one is being grown regeneratively, the other is through our standard, types of practices, all equipped with these flux tower eddy covariants, so we can study the flow of carbon in and out of these systems. So these students are getting a world-class research education, as well as learning how to do in-field research. And what is it to be a scientist in production agriculture? What is it to be a climate scientist? So with those 15 students that are primarily from minority type student populations and student demographics, we're really addressing, some of these issues that we think are important, to the growth and the development of production agriculture well into the future. The projects are multidisciplinary, so our students are being exposed to environmental scientists, biologists, chemists, engineers, business, and of course, ag and nutrition and science and those type of things. So we do think that there is, ways to address some of those barriers to get more minorities interested and excited about agriculture. And we can do it with these extracurricular type activities where we have them work as a part of our research team. In a variety of different laboratories that we have and a variety of different research projects. So we do provide stipends, and we also have employment opportunities for underrepresented students. So how are we addressing this important topic and this important need? To provide, technology in a language that they understand, and we continue to work on that. We're not anywhere near where we need to be, but we're working on it. To provide access to programs in culturally sensitive ways, we have the Office of Tribal Relations. We work with that liaison to communicate with all of the tribes in the North State. That's a lot of different tribes. And the way to do that culturally sensitive is, basically work with the elders and say, these are the kinds of things that we have available. If you have any interest, we would love to be able to communicate and talk with you. And then they can come and say, well, these are the things that, we're most interested in. It's not us trying to tell them what they need. It's them telling us what they want. And it's also respecting the culture and knowing that there are tribal elders that really are, the leadership in each of these tribes. And we respect that. And, we want to make sure that, we do that in the most respectful way possible. But a great way to communicate with them is through the Tribal Relations Office on our campus. And I know other campuses have them because we've talked with them. Provide planning and implementation funds for minority farmers and make that a priority, which we have. Provide technical expertise in their own language. We continue to work on it. And then making career opportunities available to minority students in these agricultural type majors, and just helping them understand, that agriculture is very, very diverse. It is a very, sophisticated, multidisciplinary industry. And there's lots of ways, to participate. And we need really young minds excited about regenerative agriculture in all sectors, agency, industry, allied industry, on the farm, in extension. We need these kinds of young people excited about regenerative agriculture so that we can usher in the new era in ag. And that is all I had to say today. And I'm more than welcome to, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Daly. That's such good work. And I have a lot of questions. I can see some questions filtering in from our audience too, so we'll get to those soon in the panel. I do want to go ahead and get our next speaker set up here, but it looks like we've got a poll coming up as well. So feel free to, we got the QR code there if you need to scan that if you didn't earlier with your phone, and go ahead and fill out this poll. But I think what I'll turn to now is going ahead and introducing Ruth Canada, who will be our next speaker. And Ruth has been involved with supporting smallholder farmers through both university and nonprofit settings. She led 1890 scholarships programs that encourage university students to select agriculture as a career path. Most recently, Ruth worked at Heifer International with smallholder pasture pork producers in Mississippi and helped farmers gain technical knowledge, resources, and connections that enhanced their resiliency. She believes that partnerships are one of the keys to success for farmers who are competing for market share for their products, and that farmers do produce enough to feed their communities and local and regional food systems, if local and regional food systems are strengthened. So I wanted to go ahead and turn it over to you, Ruth.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here as part of this panel. And I am currently working with Pot Liquor Capital, which is a farm community governed charitable integrated capital fund. And it was created to holistically serve Black, Indigenous, and people of color who operate at the intersection of racial and climate justice. I hear all the wonderful things that Cynthia is doing at her university, and I wish it was some mandate for all universities with College of Agriculture to provide this kind of education. I work in the South, and it is a different landscape. Whereas Pod Liquor is committed to preserving and increasing the diversity of America farmers, ranchers, and agricultural managers, our main goal is to increase equitable access to healthy food for these communities and to build wealth and knowledge within these local communities and to address climate change through adopting regenerative farming practices. And I have to put a full stop there because when I start to talk about regenerative agriculture to farmers in the Southeast, I kind of get a glazed over look. So in this work, I have seen a number of barriers and challenges, but I've also seen opportunities that the average BIPOC farmer faces that has a long-lasting impact on how we eat today and how we're going to eat in the future. We have to be mindful of the general barriers and challenges in the landscape of the smallholder and BIPOC farmer, and Cynthia mentioned a number of them. But one that I want to point out is the age of our average farmer is past retirement age. Yet these farmers are out there in the field every day, they're working. Many of these farmers have difficulty in handing over their control to the next generation, even when there's an interest by other family members. Often they don't want them to inherit some of the burdens and barriers that they've encountered over the last 30 or 35 years. Also, many, and I speak specifically from the South right now, because of these historical inequities, these farmers often lack the legal knowledge that would secure this land for the next generation. They also have a lack of understanding of tax issues for farmers, sometimes leaving money on the table that could be in their pockets. They also have difficulty in accessing local resources. And I'm sure we've all heard stories about going to the local FSA office and having to make repeated trips or having paperwork lost. These are stark realities in the Southeast. Most key, though, I think, is that farmers have expertise in growing food. They don't have expertise in developing markets. So that is why I think partnerships is so very key to having farmers become resilient and moving into the 21st century. Um, while most of our farmers, our smallholder BIPOC farmers, grow food, few of them actually own any processing facilities. So they're growing the food and then they are at the mercy of someone else who may not understand their cultural landscape for the processing of the meat, for the processing of the vegetables. And this includes meat as well as grain facilities. And BIPOC farmers, the corn, the wheat, the row crop farmers, although they only make up 8% of the row crop farmers in total, they too do not have ownership of those processing facilities. So some of the difficulties and additional barriers in transitioning to climate smart practices is farmers don't know where to start. Right now, we are in a space where they're hearing all of this new terminology. A lot of experts are using terms like climate smart practices, regenerative farming, but often these terms are very global. And with the varied types of smallholder farms, many BIPOC communities don't see an easy path to adopting these practices. So one of the things I do is I listen a lot and I walk the land with farmers. I want to hear what they say their barriers are. I don't want to Google what the barriers to farmers are. And inevitably, whether I'm on a 40-acre farm or a 180 farm, everyone has some similarities, but there's many different barriers that farmers on an individual level have that may not be addressed by someone coming in as a community saying, oh, we'll do this for you. They may not need this. Whereas when you sit there and drill down and talk and really get to know the farmer, you get a better sense of how they can move to the next level. Another difficulty in accessing climate smart practices is the potential cost. Sometimes they perceive the cost as being unaffordable, whether it's seeds for cover crops, soil amendments to replace fertilizer, different types of grazing, even no-tilling. And, you know, right now the big conversation in the South is insurance. Well, we know it's getting hotter. We know that crops are being destroyed, but a lot of farmers simply can't afford insurance. There's also a lot of news sources coming into communities telling farmers what to do and how to do it without understanding the context of the particular farm. And when I hear farmers come to me and say, well, this person talked to me and said I could do this, I always want to know, what else did they tell you? Because that may not be practical for your farm. There's also in the South, and specifically in Mississippi, a lot of skepticism around outsiders coming in to provide solutions and then going away without those solutions being applied. So in terms of the state of soil health, I love data. I'm a data geek, but I don't overwhelm the farmers with a lot of data. I think the state of soil health is flourishing, but underrepresented and smallholder farmers may not be gaining the full benefit from its findings for the reasons that both I and Cynthia discussed earlier. Some of the tools and resources that they are developing that we're trying to work with is engaging with this body of farmers in a more personal and relationship way to hear their concerns and barriers, providing some simple and affordable tools to help them understand the indicators of soil health. And in my former job, I did a lot of land management surveys through the Savory Institute in Missouri, Arkansas, and Mississippi. And you know, that's a 2-day process. We're looking at over 15 indicators. We're producing lots of data. And when we hand that to the farmer, they look at us like, oh my gosh, what does all these initials mean? So there are simpler ways to have farmers engage with their own soil so that they can see if they're trending regeneratively. So trying to make this stuff understandable to someone who doesn't love data, I think is one of our challenges. I think walking the land with the farmer rather than providing solutions from a desk can sometimes be very, very helpful. And also honoring the communities and the work that's been traditionally done to nurture and protect the soil. some of this has been lost, some of it has been captured, and sometimes when regenerative agriculture is mentioned, it's not received as well because some farmers, some of the older farmers will say, well, that's how my grandparents farmed. So we're not trying to take away anything that they may have as traditional knowledge. We're trying to supplement that. So some of the contributions that Potluck for Capital has made is helping to establish communities of practice, to build a community asset bank that allows farmers to share this knowledge and information on a both formal and informal base. We're also partnering with mission-aligned soil health organizations that provide farmer-friendly information and resources. And I think it's hard work, but I think we have to do it because I think it's important. So I would like to just leave you with that soil health has to be directly related to creating market access, hopefully at a local and regional level, so that farmers can make a good livelihood on what they're growing and what they're producing. We also need a stronger need of smallholder-based advocacy. And I know a lot of that is going on. And, you know, I had a farmer tell me the other day, I don't know what these folks in Washington's talking about, but they're not talking to me. And the technical assistance piece is something that I truly enjoy. I'll be going to Mississippi Sunday, and we'll be doing some technical assistance with about 10 farmers. And we're gonna, you know, take our shovels and dig so that they can see what happens when their soil is compacted and some of the things they may do. So I find that when taking farmers out in the field and pointing out the good things and the bad things tends to be a win-win. So that concludes my presentation. And
Thank you so much, Ruth. And as a soil scientist, I love that you're taking your shovel. I think that definitely provides some credibility and helps to ground us in, no pun intended, in the work that these folks are doing. So before we open our panel, we have another question here. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and use the QR code and participate in this poll. I do want to take a moment and go ahead and share just a few slides here in a little bit to highlight some of the observations from my particular work as a soil scientist. And I think there's some overlap with some of the work that we've heard earlier. But we have some results coming in here, and it looks like the type of support that is most beneficial, better access to equipment and technology, is number one. And then we have financial subsidies and grants coming in there, as well as education and training programs. But really strong agreement, it looks like, that access to equipment and technology and financial subsidies and grants are going to be key. So that sounds really in line with what our speakers have said so far. We'll let a few more results come in here. All right, we seem to have stabilized. So I think with that, I will take a moment here and just mention a few items. So as Seneca shared in her introduction, I am a soil scientist, and I work at the Soil Health Institute, and we're a 501c3 nonprofit. Our mission is to safeguard and enhance the vitality and productivity of soils through scientific research and advancement. I'm going to mention just a few of the things that I've had the opportunity to work on personally, but I won't be sharing a lot of slides or resources, but you can find them all for free at soilhealthinstitute.org, particularly under our work and our initiatives tabs. So if some of the economic or soil science results that I mentioned are interesting to you, feel free to check them all out there. What I did is I spent some time reflecting on the last webinar and tried to kind of bucket out some of the opportunities and barriers that I've personally seen in terms of soil health management, soil health adoption for minority growers. And this is not an exhaustive list. There'll be some overlap with other speakers, but probably some things I've missed too. we work at the Soil Health Institute, as others do, in thinking about the economics of soil health. And we're glad to be able to share with producers of all types that soil health management practices are profitable because they reduce our input costs over the long run, and they also, over the long run, can increase our yield. However, even though that is a shared benefit among all kinds of producers, we also have some challenges that I'll touch on in a moment. I think that a, uh, a a timely thing to say is that we have increased opportunity today in ecosystem service markets and value-added sales. And we've talked a little bit about access to markets. And so I would say that an opportunity that we don't want to lose with many programs today is the opportunity for our growers who, as others have said today, already have cultural and indigenous and experience knowledge from their histories, where they've already figured out some of these things, may be able to benefit or to profit from that by participating in outcomes-based solutions. But some barriers in this space, I've seen this myself. Oftentimes when we have economic data, there's very limited representation of minorities in that data. And so it's harder for them to look at that and say, well, I can see how this would benefit me if they're not included in the work. And it's easier to go out and find 100 farmers in corn and soy commodities than it is to go out and find 100 farmers right off the bat who are growing food in some cases. There are also, several of speakers mentioned this, there are upfront costs and some delayed results when we transition to soil health management systems or regenerative agriculture. It's a reality that we'll have to pay for cover crop seed. And sometimes there's new changes in equipment. And so we can't ignore those, even though they may come out in the long run. In the short term, they can be real barriers to adoption. I've had the opportunity to work at the Soil Health Institute in our internship program, especially focusing on 1890s schools. And I did neglect my barriers up here. I got ahead of myself. But just to say that the limited access to land and capital kind of go with those economic challenges that minority growers face. But jumping back down here to my mention of internships, and I was glad to see that Cindy and Ruth both talked about the needs and the skills and the perspective and the growth that we can have when we include diversity into our workforce. And I've personally seen that. I know that it's desperately needed in physical sciences and soil science and in agriculture in general. However, the reality is historical inequities can limit the pipeline and also awareness that this is a career and this is an option. So I'm excited to get to discuss some of the other speakers who've had some success in that area too. We all talked a lot about technical assistance and outreach. And today, I would say funding is fair to say is at an unprecedented scale for technical outreach. And there are some of that is set aside for, in some cases, minority growers, in some cases, historically underserved growers, which includes other groups too. So we don't want to lose that opportunity, even though there are challenges. I think we have to be mindful that that's upon us. But sometimes the diversity of crop rotations and the focus on food crops, several mentioned this today, it requires specialized knowledge. It's not the same as row crop agriculture. And so we have to understand and respect that localized and specialized knowledge. And I would say personally, it can be challenging to find the right partners to sufficiently support them and to provide those mentors that are farmers who already have this knowledge and technical specialists. One of the recent issues I would say there is because of this unprecedented funding, the people who are talented and they're in place, they may have their phones ringing off the hook. And so it may be that they don't have the bandwidth to engage with every new program that comes along. So we have to be mindful of that. I spend most of my time in this last row, which is measuring and contextualizing soil health. And I am excited to see that advances in soil health science and contextualizing soil health can support all growers in an equitable way. The Soil Health Institute has worked a lot on developing a minimum suite of soil health indicators that are cost effective. And our hope is, Ruth talked about the fact that we can't overwhelm people with data. So saying we shouldn't be measuring 35 things and, slapping those all on someone's desk and saying, you make sense of how all these 30 different measurements work for you or indicate your progress. So we hope that that is of benefit. And, we've also seen from our work partnering with the University of Sydney in Australia, being able to produce things like a free web application for people to measure their aggregate stability. That's one of those minimum suite of indicators. And we now take it away from having to send that sample off to a lab or having someone else come out and sample for you, but putting that back in the hands of individuals and saying, you have a way to really credibly conduct science on your farm and see the changes over time. But there are just massive barriers, frankly, to measuring and contextualizing soil health for minority growers. This was really well laid out in the last webinar, but just to dive in there for a moment, soils are diverse. You cannot take one soil in one region and compare it to a soil in another region, but even in a local landscape, differences in the amount of sand or clay in our soil can mean that they have really different capacities to improve their soil health. And something that we've run up to and really seen is that if we go into an area and we want to take a certain number of soil samples, it can be so tempting to take that soil sample on a nice, uniform, large field that's really highly productive. And we may take a few samples and get to characterize 3/4 of that area, which is great when you want to be able to report how many acres you've impacted, or how many bushels you've impacted, or how many bales you've impacted, or how many tons of carbon, these quantitative outcomes that all of our interventions are being measured against. But in that process, you could completely miss that other quarter in which you'd have to go in and take 5 times the number of soil samples in order to be able to get the same information. But those are the people who have traditionally not had access. They have traditionally been discriminated against. They traditionally haven't had the other support that's needed. And so there's an opportunity to be mindful that when we are thinking about outcomes-based solutions, thinking about the things that we need to quantify in order to enable those value-added markets or those ecosystem service markets, that we actually do the work to lay the foundation for that by making sure we understand the systems, the agricultural systems, and for me, the soils that these growers are really working on day to day. So with that kind of quick rundown from my desk, I just want to reflect for a few moments on what we've heard today. Bonnie really talked to us about where we are in terms of the rationale. Why are we looking at these regenerative programs at such a scale? And it's because we have human-caused climate change. There is contribution from the agricultural sector, but there's a lot of opportunity in the agricultural sector. But she also told us that farmers aren't on the hook for this by themselves. We jumped over to Cindy and heard about technology, about access to planning and implementing funds, technical assistance that was culturally appropriate and given to people in their own language. And then Ruth talked to us really about some of the specific regional barriers that they saw, the cultural sensitivity, and the importance of really engaging with these individuals and being willing to walk their fields with them. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing now, and we'll bring all of the panel members back in. If you have questions, please do enter them in the Q&A box. We'll really prefer that you can put them there. We'll try to also keep an eye on the chat too. I know there are a few questions there. But maybe to start us off, I want to go to Bonnie for the first question, which is, we heard a lot about technical assistance and ways that we can do that in an innovative approach. I know AFT has done some work there. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Oh, looks like we may have had
Irrelevant technical assistance. Oh, did I freeze?
You froze for just a minute, but I think you're back.
Okay. But the importance of culturally competent, locally relevant technical assistance, kind of recognizing the historical and cultural context of conservation practices is important, and really kind of realizing that these soil health practices don't actually come from like white people's research and development, but often from minority farmers whose cultures value reciprocity, often having to farm on marginal land, and make these, use soil health to be productive there. And so whenever we're bringing climate smart practices to minority farmers, really kind of thinking if this and knowing ahead of time if this practice aligns with those farmers' existing conservation and cultural practices. And so I wanted to give an example of work happening at AFT on our Women for the Land team, which is led by Gabrielle Roche McNally. And specifically my colleague, Nicole Guashiri, who's our Women for the Land Southeast Program Manager. And what she does is she brings women together with a focus on Black women for learning circles, and she lets the group kind of decide what they want to learn about. And then Nicole organizes workshops on those topics. And so some of those workshops have been food preservation, or like value-added products. We're having a mobile cannery, a cut flowers demonstration that was tied to agritourism, grant writing workshop, and they also had one on small tools, equipment, kind of with hands-on experience. So just thought I'd throw that out there as an idea for other organizations looking to kind of mix up how they do TA.
Great, thank you for that. As a soil scientist, Ruth, I think about diversity in cropping systems as being good for soil health, so it's always something I want to promote. But Seneca in our last webinar mentioned that we never, have growers out there planting seeds just kind of hoping that there'll be a market show up after the crop is in. And you have some experience in restorative capital and in market access. And I just wonder if you have examples or, some thoughts to share about how those can allow us to unlock some of these environmental benefits that we're all interested in, as well as the social benefits.
Well, all of the funds at Pot Liquor Capital is devoted toward climate smart practices. So we try and work with those farmers who's engaged in many different kinds of growing, whether they're livestock or vegetable, and do an assessment to see what is that farmer needing to get to the next step. It might be something through the equipment trust that we are working with, allowing farmers not to go out and make a purchase of a very expensive tractor, but have one that, is used seasonally. If you are growing in Virginia, your growing cycle is different than it is in South Carolina. So I would say putting pieces in place that works for the community, but extending that community to a larger spot so that we can have a better use of the resources. Every farmer shouldn't have to go out and buy a new tractor. Personally, I would like to see farmers farming in a way that they didn't need a tractor. But for those that do, we try and make things available on a more bartered or shared kind of prospect.
Thank you for that. So Cindy, you mentioned in your discussion that you were concerned and working in this space of education, not only in technical assistance and outreach to growers, but also student education. Who do you need help from? How can we partner to kind of solve that gap, or what opportunities do you see there?
Gaps in terms of the technical assistance that's needed, that gap, or are you talking about the deficiency of regenerative, science and regenerative technologies being infused into our College of Agriculture throughout the country and around the globe? That's a big bite, but definitely needs to be done.
Right. So I was specifically thinking about kind of that latter bucket. And so, what are some of the things that you've seen that are most successful in getting that soil health and regenerative knowledge into the education system?
Right. Well, I do think that, in general, the regenerative ag movement has really been grassroots. So the growers themselves have been educating themselves. And in many respects, we've got some great entities out there already doing and filling, are trying to fill that gap, or we've got highly experienced farmers that are educating other farmers. And, the classic example of that is Understanding Ag, and they do a marvelous job. We've hosted their webinar or their Soil Health Academy in our region multiple times. So there is some of that already ongoing. So and we need to support that. I always tell folks what we need to do is identify our rock stars in regenerative and hold them up and say, these are the folks that are getting it done. They know how to do it. They've got skin in the game. They're at the top of the regenerative paradigm, and they can mentor other farmers. So I think some of this is already happening. But to get to your question, how do we really get at infusing this? I don't know that we necessarily see that being done well at the universities yet. So I think that's why we're going to jump in, and hopefully that will cause a ripple effect. The good news is that we also have new centers for regenerative agriculture at Michigan and now in Missouri. And these are good programs that are coming along. I think we've got other programs around the country that are being sponsored at a university system. We need more of that. And then I think what we could do, Diana, is kind of create this collaborative amongst all of these entities, because we do need help. And I will tell you, we've taken a lot of arrows. There are a lot of folks that don't necessarily want to see us succeed. So we do need that support. We just need more of that kind of support, and having our own, peer group to kind of lean on. We could share resources. We could then do a national program where we did similar side by sides, because it needs to be done. We don't really understand systems. Bonnie, I've used that article faithfully in a lot of my presentations, but what we don't have is systems where we're actually looking at the full farm as an ecosystem and looking at it in terms of what its CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas, soil carbon accrual, economics, just what is the return on that investment, what's happened to that soil profile from the soil microbial perspective. All of that still needs to be done. And if we were to form a collaborative, we could support each other and regionally set these things up, because not any one entity is going to be able to cover the country. But if we had a network of campuses willing to work together on similar designs, setting up these system-based contrasts so that we could really inform policy. Part of the problem in the scientific literature, it's too hit and miss. You have to connect dots. There's no doubt this technology works. We know it does. But do we really know how it works when we stack practice, which is very common? The more mature, well-developed regenerative farms are stacked, and they've been stacked. And it takes soil time to repair. It takes a lot of time sometimes, depending on how badly it's been beat up. It takes time to restore that soil. So there's going to be differences in that transitional time. In many of the soils we're working with, it takes 3 years before we start to see soil carbon accrual happen. Think about what we could do if we were all working together, collectively, with one mind, saying, okay, these are the questions that we need to answer. This is the curriculum that we need to share. Minnesota, Jason Roundtree, you're fabulous at this regenerative adaptive grazing. You're going to provide that content. Okay. And then, we go to Texas A&M and do something else. Richard T could do a lot of great stuff. We've got Jim Myers, at Missouri. He could provide content on cover crops in the Midwest and what that rotational system looks like. I mean, I think we could do some pretty amazing things together. And that was a very long answer to your question. I apologize.
I really appreciate that. And I noted kind of in my notes that we do need to collaborate. It's such a, I noticed that Ruth and Cynthia, you both are kind of working really focused within a region. And at least in the what Bonnie and I presented, we're taking kind of a different scale. And so there's these kind of different scales that we work at, and it can be challenging sometimes to know how our efforts fit together. But I love the way you said that, Cindy. There are a couple of questions, both Tamika and Logan are asking in the comment, the question box about market access. And so really asking, how do dedicated markets, how can they benefit regenerative practices and allow us to experiment, which I think we've talked a little bit about as being important. But as well, they ask if we can speak to what is the current level of alignment between regenerative practices and markets. There's kind of a lot of talk, but is it really working on the ground? So maybe just kind of some quick answers here. We'll go, yeah, Cindy, please.
Yeah, I think that there are some entities that are trying to connect those dots. Regenify is a certification group. They are helping growers connect with markets if they qualify. So they'll go through and they'll do a whole farm assessment. Sometimes there are farms that have contracted, with some of their consultants so that they know they're on the right path. And then they have product that they want to move, and Regenify is trying to connect them. So there is that. I know Regen Score out in this part of the world. It's a program that was put together by a friend of mine, Jessica Chiartis with UC Davis. I think she's working primarily full-time with the Regen Score program. That too is a type of a certification program that puts some teeth behind the words regenerative. So they have a tracking monitoring program that you have to complete as a farmer. And then your product is available. And there's a lot of, processors and companies that are contributing to Regen Score because they want a supply chain that's regenerative. FiberShed has put that together. FiberShed's working with a ton of different entities that are looking for a regenerative fiber market. And so FiberShed is trying to fill that market by working directly with their growers. They've got a whole TAP team themselves out trying to provide this technical assistance because it's not out there. So they had to provide their own folks, and they're making that product available to like Levi, Guess Jeans, and there's a whole host of others that they're working with directly. So there is examples. We don't have a lot, but there are some examples of the people who can connect the dots.
I appreciate that. And, so that's kind of perspective from California. Ruth, do you have, kind of a perspective from the geographies that you work in?
Yes. I was involved with Land to Market, getting sort of a niche market of food on the table. The cost of that food, however, does not have a great impact on food swamps and food deserts because that product typically has a higher price tag. And folks who are on SNAP or struggling to eat are not often looking at food that's regenerative. So I think that there's a lot being done in that space of regen and making, these niche markets and niche producers and processors. But I would have to say that smallholder farmers don't always have access to these markets for a number of reasons that we talked about earlier. They may not have made the full transition if they have to have a certain score to determine if their land is trending toward regeneration. That could take up to 5 years for them to know. So for struggling communities and populations, I don't think that their goal is to necessarily get their meat into this specialized market or to get their produce. Their goal is just to sell whatever it is they're growing. And as they build more in the regenerative space, perhaps there's an opening. But right now, they're just wanting a market, something at a higher level than a farm stand on the corner. They just need to sell their food to people who need that food, which is why I'm a very big proponent of having local and regional markets.
Really good perspective, and good to hear that's kind of another angle, another thing that we need to be concerned about. Not just that we get the score needs to be there. We need those outcomes, but we also don't want to have unintended consequences to folks who need that food. Bonnie, has AFT done some work in this space too?
Yeah, so I can speak to part of the goal of the Climate Smart Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities programs are to build markets for climate smart commodities. And so for our climate smart beef project, one of our partners is Integrity Beef, which budded out of the Noble Research Institute. And so the idea is, there are these big marketplaces for big cattle producers in Texas and Oklahoma, where they've previously been able to show that they can raise regenerative cattle and sell it at a special auction to buyers who will pay a premium for climate smart beef. But that's really not available to most cattle producers in the United States are raising like 40 or 50 head of cattle. And so our partnership for climate smart commodities has, and we're just sort of getting started, so this is sort of still theory, but the idea is to bring producers together in regions like the Mid-Atlantic and the Southeast so that together, animals that have been raised in a climate smart way, that have a life cycle analysis that we're working on with our partner Indigo Ag, can be sold at a larger auction that a bigger buyer would be interested in, who's able to pay a premium for the climate smart beef. Because otherwise, a lot of the smaller producers don't have access to a buyer who would pay that premium. So that's one of the ways that we're trying to work on that at AFT.
Thanks for sharing that. And so I think we're coming down to the last few minutes, but before I turn it back over, I maybe just want to go through a little bit of a rapid lightning round here for our panelists. This is obviously a very complex space, and it's a very challenging space. And so what keeps each of you enthusiastic about doing this work, even amidst the challenges? Maybe we'll just go in the order of presentation. So I'll start with Bonnie and then go to Cindy and end with Ruby.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. Part of what keeps me hopeful sometimes, especially in difficult times, is the idea that being hopeful is sort of an act of rebellion, like the big like fossil fuel companies and others, like they want us to be not motivated and feel like we can't change. And so just being hopeful, is that. But also the amount of funding that has gone into climate smart practices, and with the ability to focus funds on historically underserved producers with this administration, really has me hopeful to say, hey, this is a big moment. We need to show that we can, use these dollars smartly and get these things done. So it's a really big moment for agriculture. And I'll pass it to Ruth. Or no, Cynthia went next. So I'll pass it to Cynthia.
Okay, I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah, I've got a little computer glitch going on here, so you'll have to forgive me. There's a lot of things that get me excited about this whole. That's probably why we, spend so much time developing the center in the way that we have. But I think what really I find the most engaging, that really is super exciting, it's finding these growers that actually get it when the light comes on, so they may kind of stick their toe in the water. They may try a multi-species cover, or they may try some compost, and then they start making their own observations. Farmers are incredibly observant, and they're very much tied to the land, and can observe things in ways that most people can't. And when they get it and they see the transformation that's underway on their farms because of these, the way that they're practicing. And then, ultimately they start to pull away from some of the inputs because they've re-enlivened the soil microbiome to the point where nutrients are cycling. Water cycle's been repaired. Now we start to see the fact that, this biology is doing a lot of the work. In short, I know I can, I'm blown away by the way in which the farmers are responding and the way in which they can engage other farmers. And so I really want to see that happen so that we can create that ripple effect, that we need to get large scale transition. We need to recruit more farmer mentors to really talk the talk and walk the walk.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I think I'm excited that farmers are getting an opportunity to join the larger conversation about soil health, especially working in an area where the land has been raped for centuries through, impossible agricultural kind of endeavors. And now farmers are actually excited about bringing that soil back to a state of health and tying that health of the soil to the health of the community, because I think they're very, very excited to know that there might be help to improve the health of the community through the food that they're growing. So when I heard conversation and language around we want the soil to be healthier because we want the food to be healthier, I realized then there is an entryway to get more farmers excited about soil health.
Thank you all. Well, this has been really exciting, and I think we'll turn it back over to our organizers at this point.
Thank you so much. For the last minute, we just want to remind everyone that we have 2 additional webinars that you can register for. The next one will be in October and is focused on mapping information networks and further understanding barriers to accessing resources and funding, which we heard in our poll that was also an area of concern. And then our last session will be in December, which will be talking more about cost benefit analysis and an economic discussion for the real cost of our minority farmers to transition, which we heard a lot of the panelists discuss. I also want to extend another heartfelt thank you to our amazing moderator and our panel for a rigorous discussion. And transition to the next slide, please. And a thank you, and I'll leave Seneca with the last word.
Thank you all for participating, for engaging. We had some great conversations in the chat as well as the Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself, Dr. Odom, also Suzanne Russo, who's in this work with us, but she's not here with us today. Please continue to reach out to our websites to learn more about what we're doing. We will be sending out an email which contains the link to today's webinar, but it will also be on the FFAR webpage as well. And have a great weekend. Have a great Friday. Again, thank you to everyone. Thank you to our panelists, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar session.
Thank you.